Attempt number 1. Katsuki swore as he tripped over another stupid fucking rock. He'd been following the same long, winding road up the side of the mountain for days. The path was old and barely used, and large areas of it had simply fallen away. He'd had to employ some pretty creative maneuvering to get across, but of course he'd managed. Katsuki kicked the rock angrily. He watched as it bounced over the edge of the rocky cliff and down into the thick expanse of treetops hundreds of feet below. Wow, what a pretty view, the boy a few paces behind him breathed, his face full of wonder. Katsuki very nearly booted him off the side of the mountain too. He hadn't actually tried to kill the teen yet, and this was something he took no small amount of pride in. Shut the fuck up, Katsuki snapped, picking up the pace while his companion staggered behind him, struggling to keep up. Katsuki was on an important quest. Now that he had come of age, it was time to join his tribe as a man. On his 16th birthday he'd been drugged, tied up and dropped into the middle of a vast wilderness utterly foreign to him as per tradition. It wasn't uncommon for teens never to return, and those that did could take years to do so. The shortest period anyone had ever returned in was 4 months. Katsuki was aiming to beat this record, as he'd loudly proclaimed. He'd been preparing for this all his life. But nothing could have prepared him for how boring all this walking would be. Katsuki had stolen a horse from a small village and ridden it for a while, but the thing spooked so easily it had hardly been worth it. He'd dumped the stupid animal in the next town over. This was, unfortunately, where he'd come across the green-haired teen who was presently testing the limits of his sanity. The boy had approached him from behind a stone pillar late one night while Katsuki was threatening a villager for information. Are you a fire summoner? He'd asked, staring at Katsuki like he was the reincarnation of some powerful deity. I thought they were just a myth. But what you did just now, Katsuki had sneered at the boy while the threatened villager ran off. He'd extended his hand and effortlessly produced a ball of flame half a foot in diameter that danced on his palm. Fuck off, he'd said, curling his lip. I'm on an important mission, and I ain't got time for the likes of you. But instead of shrinking away in fear, the other teen had smiled brightly. Wow, that's so cool, he'd said enthusiastically. Can I come? He'd adjusted the large round shield on his back and tugged at the front of his green tunic. I don't have any cool powers, but I've got a sword and a shield. I could help dash, don't need your shitty help, Katsuki had snapped, already annoyed by the boy. He'd turned on his heel and left, but that hadn't stopped the tag-along. Katsuki was a lone wolf, a bloodthirsty warrior best left to his own devices. This was his quest. Yet despite the blonde's constant threats, attempts to ditch him, and even use of fists, the freckled teen had persisted. Katsuki would have tried killing him if he wasn't so sure the guy would respawn somewhere nearby and find him again. Katsuki had been traveling with the boy, who he'd learned was named Izuku, for almost a month now. He hated to admit it, but the teen had actually proven himself useful on a number of occasions. Deku was far better at handling sentient beings than Katsuki, who would always resort to threats and displays of intimidation. Thanks to the teen's poking and prodding, after a couple of weeks they'd gotten wind of the path Katsuki was searching for. There was only one route up the mountain, and those that traveled it never came down. They'd had to combat countless renegades, monsters and strange hybrids along the way. After the first few encounters, Deku had begun holding his own and Katsuki had stopped feeling like an old maid tasked with monitoring the tribe's younglings. And admittedly another warm body had been useful on cold nights in abandoned caves and among branches. Katsuki's breath hitched as the steep incline of the path began to peter out. It seemed that they were finally reaching the summit. Deku must have sensed this as well, because he hopped excitedly and started to hum. Katsuki would have told him to shut up again if it wasn't so damned cute. Wait, no. Scratch that. Not cute. Annoying. A heavy purple haze descended upon the boys as they stepped onto a wide plateau. The air grew thick enough to get caught in your throat. At the far end of the rocky terrace was an impossibly long old wooden bridge. It creaked, stretching far into the mist and disappearing. Beneath it was an abyss, swirling with violets and cobalts. Katsuki smirked triumphantly, he knew of this bridge. It was spoken of in stories told by the mighty who returned. As they approached, a figure began to materialize. A woman with mauve skin and eyes of pure white stood before the bridge. She seemed clothed by the mist itself. Between her hands was an elaborate staff. She didn't move to acknowledge them, but she sensed their presence. You approach, dragon tamer. The woman addressed Katsuki in a voice that spoke for many, as rich as the air and as deep as the earth. Katsuki planted his feet in front of her and grinned toothily. Deku watched in amazement, his mouth hanging open. "It is I, Bakudeku Katsuki of the lost tribe of the fire summoners," he said loftily, the words tasting sweet in his mouth. "Dragon's blood runs in my veins. I have come to claim my wings, guardian of the bridge." The guardian did not move. "Those of the tribe who wish to fly with dragons must first prove their worth," she said in that strange voice. "Once you pass my test, you may continue." Flamethrower, Katsuki's grin grew wider, sparks already emitting from the palms of his hands. He was ready for anything. What would it be this time? Trolls? Chimeras? Katsuki took his fighting stance, breathless with anticipation. "I am ready, Guardian," he said. The Guardian opened her mouth. "In order to cross this bridge," she said, "you must reveal of yourself a deep truth." Katsuki stared at the Guardian blankly. "Ha! You must reveal of yourself a deep truth," the Guardian repeated. Katsuki blinked, his expression quickly turning to anger. "A deep the fuck are you talking about?" he demanded. Deku said, choosing this moment to speak up. "I think she might mean you have to reveal something personal about yourself?" "Shut up, shitty Deku," Katsuki yelled. Deku squeaked and snapped his mouth shut. "Where's the monster? Where's the guy I gotta kill? I don't think it's that kind of challenge." Shut up, Katsuki roared. He began to pace angrily. "I'm here to get my fucking dragon." "What kind of bullshit test is this?" Katsuki whirled on the Guardian. "She's not that tall," he thought. He made a run at her, taking a great leap over her head. Katsuki's leap was abruptly stopped when his entire body came in contact, face first, with the air. Katsuki fell onto his back at the Guardian's feet, his mahogany cloak fluttering down around him. The Guardian did not move. What the fuck?" Katsuki spluttered, his mouth covered in the blood that poured from his nose. He looked above the Guardian's head and saw nothing. Staggering to his feet, he produced a flame that curled in on itself, forming a ball. He flung it as hard as he could at the empty space where he'd been halted. The fireball flew forward, then disintegrated inches above the Guardian's head. Katsuki had never seen anything like this before. It was as if there was an impenetrable wall of glass surrounding her. It mocked him. Katsuki snarled and tried to shove the Guardian out of the way, but she didn't budge. She wasn't even that big. Katsuki had easily thrown men twice his own size to the ground. He stomped around her, becoming more and more irate. He kicked his foot out to her side. It was stopped again by the invisible force. "Kachan, maybe you should fuck OFF." Katsuki roared, setting both palms alight. A crazed look spread over his face. If the bitch wouldn't move, he'd just have to destroy her. He brought his flaming hands towards the Guardian and grabbed her by the head. "Kachan, no." Attempt number 2. Katsuki and Deku were panting by the time they reached the top of the mountain again. Okay, so maybe maiming the Guardian wasn't a good idea. They'd run a good chunk of the way, but it had still taken them 2.5 days to get back to the plateau. Katsuki was exhausted, and he was cranky. Deku looked dead on his feet. They approached the Guardian, and once again, she spoke. "You must reveal of yourself a deep truth, acid spitter," Katsuki growled. He'd been thinking about the Guardian's words the whole way up, and he still had no idea what they meant. He stared the Guardian down. It felt a little pointless since she did not seem capable of blinking. "A deep truth," Katsuki repeated, balling his hands into fists. This couldn't possibly be the final test that every warrior had to pass. Could it? Deku said, stepping forward. "I've thought of something, if that's alright." The Guardian remained silent. Katsuki looked at Deku incredulously. Deku pressed his fingers together, staring at them so intensely he nearly went cross-eyed. "I come from a long line of war heroes," he said haltingly. "My father was a great general who was killed in battle. As his only son, I was raised to follow in his footsteps." He took a deep breath. "But I've never wanted to be a general. Generals go off into battle and kill others over land and resources." "Ah," Katsuki thought understandingly. "The bloodlust. I don't want to kill anyone," Deku continued. "I want to save people. But rejecting my path would bring shame to my lineage. I don't want to dishonor my family." He swallowed. "I'm not sure what I should do. Most of the time I feel too weak to do anything. All I know is I have to do something. Katsuki shook his head, completely disgusted by Deku's lack of warrior spirit. But lo and behold, the guardian slowly inclined her head and stepped aside. The little bastard had really done it. Deku caught Katsuki's stare, and he looked away and shuffled his feet. I wanted to help, he said timidly, chancing a glance at the blonde. A warmth bloomed in Katsuki's chest. What was this feeling? Gratitude, perhaps? Hell, Katsuki seriously considered not telling Deku that had he spoken those words in front of the tribe, he'd have been tied up and left to drown at the bottom of a lake. Katsuki watched as Deku stepped onto the bridge without issue. Whatever, he grumbled, glad the ordeal was over with. He took 2 steps forward and smacked his face into the wall of air. Katsuki cursed and staggered back, his nostrils flaring. Deku was standing only a few feet away, realization dawning on his face. You must reveal of yourself a deep truth, the guardian said. Katsuki slammed his fist against the invisible barrier. What, you want me to spout some embarrassing shit like fucking Deku when that's gonna make me worthy? He yelled, glaring at the guardian. Don't make me laugh. Katsuki took a few steps back, turning his palms towards the sky. Give me a fucking troll. I'll tear him to pieces. You must reveal of yourself a deep truth. Fuck you, asshole. Katsuki charged at the guardian, palms ablaze. Ka-chan. Attempt number 4. Okay, I got this, Katsuki said, who was starting to get sick of walking up that fucking mountain. If that little shit Deku had passed the guardian's test, then he certainly could. Katsuki sauntered over to the guardian, placing one cocky hand on his hip. I am Bakudeku Katsuki of the lost tribe of the fire summoners, he proclaimed. Know my name and tremble. Once I have claimed my dragon, I will rejoin my tribe and take my rightful place as leader. I will conquer this land and rule it from the skies. Anyone who dares oppose me will be turned to ash. That's not very heroic, Deku muttered. Katsuki sneered. The weak-willed boy will be my slave, he informed the guardian. He will prove useful once his people are under my control. I'm the same age as you. And I'm not going to be anybody's slave. You must reveal of yourself a deep truth, the guardian said. Katsuki looked at the guardian in confusion. That was it, he said dumbly. I'm amazing, and I'm going to be lord of this land for all eternity. Ka-chan, Deku interrupted. Katsuki turned to glare at him. Deku froze, biting his lip before he continued speaking. I think you're going to have to dig a little deeper than that. Ha! Izuku paused. Don't you have something that worries you? Or, I don't know nothing worries me, Katsuki roared. I am without fear. You must reveal of yourself a deep truth, the guardian said. Katsuki set his palms alight. Attempt number 9. I can kill a wild boar with my bare hands. You must reveal of yourself a deep truth. I will turn entire cities to rubble. You must reveal of yourself a deep truth. When I was a youngling I got lost in the wilderness. I killed a great serpent so that when I was found I could say I'd gone hunting. You must reveal of yourself a deep truth. I wet my sheets until I was 8 years old. You must reveal of yourself a deep truth. Attempt number 12. Katsuki was sweating. He'd spouted a myriad of embarrassing facts about himself over the past week, but none had served his purpose. He was red-faced, huffing, and utterly humiliated. At least Deku wasn't paying much attention anymore. The idiot was lying on his back on the plateau, staring up into the mist and looking a million miles away. Katsuki was wasting time. He'd been stuck here for over a month. What did he have left to say? What the hell was a deep truth anyways? Deku must have noticed the long silence, because he lifted his head from the rocky terrain. Ka-chan, he said, rising to his feet and dusting off his pants. Not that you haven't said some interesting stuff, but I don't think that's what the guardian is looking for. He trotted over to Katsuki, a concerned expression on his face. How the hell would you know? Katsuki snapped, his temper already well past its boiling point. Deku scratched the back of his head. Well, I've already passed, he said. Katsuki's face contorted. Deku fidgeted, then reached out and pressed a hand against the blonde's chest. Isn't there anything you feel in here? He asked. Katsuki snarled. Deku sighed. Surely it can't be this hard for you to be a little introspective, he said. Listen, Ka-chan. Don't think about things you've done. Try to think about things you feel. Feel? Feelings were for the weak. Katsuki scoffed, but Deku held his gaze. He smiled that stupid smile of his that always made him look like he'd swallowed the fucking sun. There's got to be something, Deku said, his emerald eyes boring into the blonde. Katsuki thought about how Deku had helped him find this ancient path. He remembered how he'd driven his long knife into the back of a bandit's skull when the man had been about to impale Deku with his long spear. He remembered how Deku had cut down a rogue beast when Katsuki's back was turned dealing with two others. Katsuki looked at that dumb freckled face and thought about how Deku's mumbling habit had gone from being unwelcome to becoming a semi-pleasant distraction over their long journey. He thought about how no matter how hard he tried, Deku refused to leave. Katsuki had never been one for thoughts and feelings. He relied on actions. Kachan, Deku asked, tilting his head in a way that Katsuki really shouldn't have found endearing. It made him want to grab him by his stupid curls and no. Not that. Anything but that. Kachan, Deku repeated. Katsuki took a step backwards and lowered his head, panic rising in his gut. He stared at the ground and began to pace. Are you alright? Deku asked. Shut up, Katsuki yelled. When he looked up, his face was scarlet. Deku's brows knotted together in worry. Are you sick? Shut up. Here, let me just Katsuki hadn't once tried to kill Deku. Argh, Katsuki screamed. He charged at the teen and pushed him over the edge of the plateau before he'd even realized what he was doing. Attempt number 17. Hey, Kachan, Deku said. Katsuki whipped his head around. He glared at the green-haired teen sitting cross-legged on the plateau. What? Deku raised his eyes to meet Katsuki's. The blonde immediately had to look away. How many more times do you think we're going to do this? Deku asked, his fist resting against his cheek. Katsuki bristled. The hell's that supposed to mean? He demanded. Deku hesitated. Well, we've climbed this mountain 18 times now. 17, Katsuki thought. And it's a nice view and all, but I was thinking it'd be super if we could move on soon. You can move on, Katsuki said bitterly. Why don't you just go and leave me the hell alone? I don't have the right blood, Deku replied. He looked at Katsuki with the most solemn expression he'd ever seen on the amiable teen's face. I heard that if a dragon kills someone not of the blood, they never come back. Then why the fuck are you coming? Katsuki snapped, turning around fully. His patience was long past gone. Why do you keep following me around? Deku considered as he rose to his feet. You're really cool, he said, a flush rising to his cheeks. I've never met anyone like you before. You're so determined and confident. You know exactly what you want and where you're going. I guess I'd like to be more like you. Deku offered Katsuki a weak smile. I know you didn't like me much at first, but more recently, I thought that changed. Even though you threatened me and everything, you never killed me. He grimaced and a sad expression took over his face. At least until now. Why'd you start doing that, Kachan? It hurts, you know. Do you hate me after all? Katsuki was at a loss for words. He looked at the troubled expression on the other boy's face and growled. He stomped around on the plateau, glaring furiously at everything but Deku. It's not that, he hissed through gritted teeth. Then what is it? Katsuki swore again, racking his brain for anything that might fulfill this quest that didn't involve the confused emotions churning in his gut. He ignored Deku's question and stalked over to the Guardian. You must reveal of yourself a deep truth, the Guardian said. Katsuki's breathing became shallow. Fuck. He set the Guardian on fire. Attempt number 21. When they reached the top of the mountain, Deku flung his shield onto the ground with a loud clang. I'm done, he said. This was new. What? Katsuki said, his fists twitching. I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. Deku sat down on the plateau stubbornly. Katsuki nudged the side of Deku's leg with his boot. Get up, he said. Why was Deku always being so difficult? No, Deku folded his arms and huffed. My legs are killing me and my feet are about to fall off. I'm not walking up that mountain anymore, so you better get it this time, Katsuki snarled, eyeing the Guardian. She stood by the bridge as always, her expression impassive. Fine, he snapped. Who needs a shitty nerd anyways? Katsuki stomped over to the Guardian. You're running out of time, you know, Deku said. We've been doing this for 2 months. Don't you think I know that? Katsuki yelled, his temper flaring. He spun and gave Deku a ferocious glare. Don't you think I want to move on? Deku glared right back, getting to his feet and balling his hands into fists. Then why don't you? He shouted, his eyes narrowed in unusual fury. We keep walking up this stupid mountain over and over again because you keep dragging your heels. I'm not dragging shit, Katsuki spat. Yes you are, Deku yelled, his face screwing up. You've thought of something. I know you have because you've been acting funny for weeks. He brought his foot down hard on the ground. You're the one who wants a dragon, right? That's all you've been talking about since we met. Dragon this, dragon that. You were going to beat your tribe's record. How long has it been since you started your quest? It must be over 3 months by now. Shut up, Katsuki roared. You're running out of time, Deku repeated, his voice starting to take on a shrill tone. You're running out of time and I'm tired. So stop being such a coward and say what you need to say. Shut up, Katsuki stormed over to Deku, fire sparking in his palms. What are you so afraid of? Die. I'm not scared of you, Katsuki. I'm not dash without thinking. Katsuki grabbed Deku by the wrist and pulled the other boy towards him roughly, smashing their faces together. It was a brutish, forceful kiss, half to shut Deku up and half to. Katsuki didn't know exactly. When Katsuki pulled away, his face felt as hot as the fire he normally produced from his palms. At least he could take solace in the fact that Deku looked just as flustered. The boy's mouth hung open uselessly as he stared at Katsuki in shock. Katsuki bit back a scream and charged over to the guardian. Is this what you wanted? He screamed at her, his breathing haggard. Are you happy now, you stupid bitch? You must reveal of yourself a deep truth, the guardian said. Katsuki's brain short-circuited. Deku approached the guardian shakily and waved his hand in front of her white, unblinking eyes. Keiko-chan, he said softly, his face still red. I don't think she can see. Katsuki went silent. A vein in his temple throbbed. The right side of his face twitched. Deku's eyes grew whiter and whiter. Katsuki exploded. FUUUUUUUUUUUUUUC attempt number 23. The last 2 times up the mountain had been both better and worse. Better, because at least Deku wasn't yelling anymore. Worse, because the freckled teen had instead taken to sneaking glances at Katsuki whenever he thought the blonde wasn't looking. Katsuki didn't understand the meaning of it, but it was getting on his last nerve. For his own part, Katsuki had been avoiding Deku's gaze with furious intent. As they neared the plateau, Deku shuffled closer, their shoulders brushing. I have a good feeling about this one, he said, his mouth twitching. Katsuki scowled. You said that last time, nerd, Deku beamed. That's okay, he said. This time you'll get it for sure, Katsuki said nothing. He stomped onto the plateau and over to the expressionless guardian. You must reveal of yourself a deep truth, the guardian said. Katsuki hissed and looked away. Deku patted his back reassuringly. You can do it, Kachan, he whispered, his eyes bright. Fucking Deku and his stupid face. Katsuki closed his eyes, collecting his thoughts. When he opened them, Deku was still watching him eagerly, his whole body frozen and fists bunched up in excitement. It made Katsuki want to kill him, now no, not that. The other thing. Katsuki widened his stance and folded his arms across his chest. You've got this, Deku said encouragingly. Fuck. Katsuki looked at Deku and opened his mouth. He copped out. I like guys, Katsuki heard himself saying. If the tribe found out they'd never let me back. The guardian paused for a very long time, and then she inclined her head excruciatingly slowly and stepped aside. You may pass, Stormbringer, she said. Katsuki should have been elated, but he wasn't done yet. He whirled on Deku, whose face was expressing a confusing mix of excitement and disappointment. I was fine. Everything was fine until you showed up, he shouted accusingly, jabbing a finger into Deku's chest. Mean it, Deku asked, the disappointment falling away as a new smile began to form. Yeah, you, Katsuki yelled, his face reddening. He grabbed his hair in distress. You had to come out of fucking nowhere and start following me around with your stupid fucking face and your dumb curls, your shitty big eyes and your idiot freckles. Stop looking at me like that, he screeched. Deku's smile grew bigger and bigger. Kachan, he said, brushing Katsuki's accusing finger away and stepping closer. Is there maybe something else you want to say to me? Yeah. Stop acting so goddamn helpful all the time. It pisses me off, Deku laughed and shook his head. No, he said. He set his hands on Katsuki's shoulders, leaned in and kissed him softly. Katsuki felt his heart skip a beat. Before he knew it, he was returning the gesture. Maybe Deku wasn't so bad after all. This kissing thing was pretty awesome at least. Hell, maybe he didn't even need the tribe. They were all a bunch of assholes anyways. Katsuki could take on the world by himself, he was amazing, after all. Deku broke the kiss and Katsuki's thoughts snapped back to reality. Deku's face was flushed, but he was still smiling. Well, he asked. Anything else you want to say? Katsuki's expression soured. How much more was he going to have to do? What did Deku want from him now? Hadn't he suffered enough? No, Katsuki snapped. What the hell would I possibly have to say to you, stupid Deku? He spun on his foot and began stomping away. Deku's face fell, his expression morphing into sadness, then anger, then rage. Come on, we've got a dragon to tame and I ain't wasting any more time, Katsuki yelled over his shoulder. They could still make it. They still had a week or so Deku yelled. Before Katsuki knew what was happening, a pair of strong hands slammed against his back. He could have sworn he caught a glimpse of a smile on the Guardian's face just before he went over the edge of the plateau. As Katsuki plummeted through the purple and blue abyss, his inevitable death looming up at him, he was struck with the sudden realization that maybe, just maybe, he had deserved this. Kudos to Television, bands I like, Ghosty Boy, Imworld, Slady Dyson, Shuyuzuku, Emilka, Little Girl 1, Confuzzled Bookworm, Dogapats, De La Labelle, Flayla, Quite Heartless, 2D Litical, Endersid, Junies, Nodio Urmother, Drafting Tides, Withered Heart, Jinquility, Lev Lovetiku, Megan McBlue, Lucille Lost, Elacutus, Black White Life, Ekin, Dreaming Sunday, Bookwyvern for Life, Talon Reads, Darkness 0030, Arachne 13, Grey Ghost Reborn, Generator Cat, Spicy Nudlesk, Paloma Vazru, Veriter, Lisbeth Loon, Meatmoop 247. Pko, Queen Jupiter, Maleth, Roodsmary, Amello 11, Nonachan, DC Wizard, I Like Frogs 53719, Too Sleepy for You, Looks Be Gone, Kapakoop,